During his terms as an AEC commissioner, Strauss became hostile to Oppenheimer, the physicist who had been director of the Los Alamos laboratory during the Manhattan Project and who, after the war, became a celebrated public figure and remained in influential positions in atomic energy. In 1947, Strauss, a trustee of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, presented Oppenheimer with the Institute's offer to be its director. Strauss himself, as a man of high intelligence and financial skills, if not higher education, had also been considered for the job. He was the Institute's faculty's fifth-ranked choice, while Oppenheimer was their first-ranked. Strauss, a conservative Republican, had little in common with Oppenheimer, a liberal who had had communist associations. Oppenheimer subsequently was a leading opponent of moving ahead with the hydrogen bomb and proposed a national security strategy based on atomic weapons and continental defense. Strauss wanted the development of thermonuclear weapons and a doctrine of deterrence. Oppenheimer supported a policy of openness regarding the numbers and capabilities of the atomic weapons in America's arsenal. Strauss believed that such unilateral frankness would benefit no one but Soviet military planners. In addition, Strauss disliked Oppenheimer on a variety of personal grounds. Starting in 1947, Strauss had been in a dispute with the General Advisory Committee (GAC) of senior atomic scientists, which Oppenheimer chaired and which reported to the AEC, over whether exporting radioisotopes for medical purposes was a risk to U.S. security, from which the scientists on the GAC developed a poor image of Strauss. Then during a public hearing in 1949, the real physicist Oppenheimer had given a mocking answer to a point the amateur physicist Strauss had raised on the subject, a humiliation that Strauss did not forget. Strauss was also offended by Oppenheimer having once engaged in adulterous relations. And Strauss did not like that Oppenheimer had seemingly left his Jewish heritage behind. Whereas Strauss had become successful despite the anti-Semitic environment of Washington while still maintaining his prominent roles in Jewish organizations and his Temple Emmanuel presidency. When Eisenhower offered Strauss the AEC chairmanship, Strauss named one condition: Oppenheimer would be excluded from all classified atomic work. Oppenheimer held a highest-level Q clearance, and was one of the most respected figures in atomic science, briefing the President and the National Security Council on several occasions. Strauss, however, deeply distrusted Oppenheimer. He had become aware of Oppenheimer's former communist affiliations before World War II and questionable behavior during the war, and he began to think that Oppenheimer might even be a Soviet spy. Strauss was suspicious of Oppenheimer's tendency to downplay Soviet capabilities. In 1953, Oppenheimer stated in the July edition of Foreign Affairs that he believed the Soviets were about 4 years behind in nuclear weapons development. The United States had exploded the first thermonuclear device the previous year. However, only a month after Oppenheimer made his proclamation, in August 1953, the Soviet Union declared that it had tested its own fusion-based bomb, which U.S. censors identified as a boosted fission weapon. Strauss was not alone in having his doubts. A number of other officials in Washington were also suspicious that Oppenheimer might be a security risk. In September 1953, Strauss, hoping to uncover evidence of Oppenheimer's disloyalty, asked FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to initiate surveillance to track Oppenheimer's movements. The director readily did so. The tracking uncovered no evidence of disloyalty but that Oppenheimer had lied to Strauss about his reason for taking a trip to Washington. Oppenheimer met a journalist but had told Strauss that he had visited the White House. Strauss's suspicions increased further with the discovery that in 1948 and 1949 Oppenheimer had tried to stop the long-range airborne detection system that Strauss had championed and that had worked in discovering the Soviet Union's first atomic weapon test in December 1953. The FBI notified Strauss that it would not watch Oppenheimer more closely without a specific request, which Strauss provided. Director Hoover then ordered full surveillance on Oppenheimer and his attorneys, including illegal tapping of phones. At first Strauss moved cautiously, even heading off an attack on Oppenheimer by Senator Joseph McCarthy. He had the AEC staff compile a list of charges and surprise Oppenheimer with them in December 1953. Strauss is often most strongly remembered as the driving force in the month-long hearings held in April and May 1954, before an AEC Personnel Security Board that resulted in Oppenheimer's security clearance being revoked. Strauss had access to the FBI's information on Oppenheimer, including his conversations with his lawyers, which was used to prepare counterarguments in advance. In the end, despite the support of numerous leading scientists and other prominent figures, Oppenheimer was stripped of his clearance one day before it would have expired anyway, as Strauss had wanted. By all accounts, the hearings broke Oppenheimer's spirit and he was never the same person afterward.